Welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here today. We will start this webinar in 30 seconds. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am very pleased to get this webinar on ending corporal punishment in schools started. It's wonderful to have so many of you here. My name is Beth Herbert and I work at the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. I will make a couple of housekeeping announcements and then I'll hand over to our chair for this webinar, Menaz Aziz. Just a couple of announcements. You can find interpretation into Arabic, French, Spanish and English at the bottom of your screen. I'm very pleased to share the new report with you and I'll share that in the chat in just a moment. And we encourage you to post on social media about today's event and report using the hashtag #EndCorporalPunishment. I think that's everything from me. And now I'm very pleased and deeply honoured to hand over to the chair of today's webinar, Menaz Aziz. Menaz was one of 11 women elected to the National Assembly of Pakistan in 2018. Within the parliamentary system, Menaz is a strong advocate for gender mainstreaming, child rights, women's economic empowerment and political participation. To this end, she has undertaken multiple initiatives as first for the Parliament of Pakistan. She's established the country's first parliamentary caucus on child rights and is creating parliamentary alliances on the SDGs and human rights at federal and provincial levels. As a senior executive, Menaz has extensive experience in the development sector, founding and leading many organisations, and has been a committed advocate of change with vast experience in bringing together stakeholders across multiple sectors. Menaz played a particularly critical role in the enactment of legislation that prohibited corporal punishment in Islamabad Capital Territory schools, alternative care settings, daycare and the penal system in December 2021. And Menaz is also one of the founding members and a global co-chair of the Executive Council of the International Parliamentary Network for Education, which was formed with the mission to deepen political understanding of and commitment to inclusive and equitable quality education. Menaz, thank you very much for chairing today's webinar. We're very grateful for your participation and support. The floor is yours. We seem to have lost her. Menas, are you there? Sorry about this, everyone. We seem to have lost her momentarily, which is very unfortunate. I think maybe what we should do is move on to the young people who are going to be speaking at today's event. I know they have an introduction that they would like to make as well, and then we can move back to Menas. So we have Lucia, Christina, and Abdul. Maybe I can introduce them. So Lucia is 18 years old and from Ecuador. She's part of the Global Network of Religion for Children, and as part of this has done advocacy work with the campaign No se dialogue, no se maltrata, which means we engage in dialogue instead of abusing, and she supports the Learning to Live Together training. We also have Christina, who's 17 years old and from Nepal. Christina is actively involved in her municipal level child club network, advocating for child rights, protecting from harm and safe schools. And Abdul is 16 years old and a child rights advocate from the Philippines. And within his organization, Voices of the Youth, and as a youth leader for his school students council, he's actively involved in the promotion of children's rights through advocacy on anti-physical and humiliating punishment in schools campaign. Oh, Menas, there you are. Okay, I will hand over to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sorry, these are glitches that we go through in our everyday life. A very warm welcome to everyone attending today. I'm delighted to tell you that over 500 people from across the world have registered for this very important event, showing what a vital and urgent issue this is for all societies, ending violent punishment for children in schools. I have done my bit in it. I have passed the prohibition of corporal punishment law, which has rules now and which is being enacted in the Islamabad capital territories, but much work has to be done for it to be implemented. I'm very pleased to be chairing this international webinar where we are launching a new landmark report on corporal punishment in schools. Very important for the country, especially who haven't adopted a prohibition of corporal punishment, to read about. The report is written by the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, together with the Safe to Learn Coalition and the Coalition for Good Schools. And it discusses the impact that violent punishment has on children and education, and explores how we can make faster progress towards non-violent teaching and learning for the benefit of all children, but also for building peaceful, fair, and effective societies. Corporal punishment in school is an urgent issue. And still, developed countries have states and provinces that do not ban corporal punishment. And we have to push for that. We are here together. All the 500 participants that we have are our ambassadors to make the change. It is fundamental breach of children's rights, and research now shows conclusively that it leads to physical and psychological harm that can last a child's entire life. Tragically, sometimes even leading to their deaths that we have had in Pakistan. It is very common in many places. For a huge number of children, violent punishment in schools is a regular, even daily experience. School corporal punishment undermines everything that education is seeking to achieve. It impairs children's cognitive development and academic success. And importantly, the report shows that vulnerable and disadvantaged children, those who most need the benefits of education, are particularly likely to be affected. Taken together, it is clear that school corporal punishment has high costs for children and society. However, the good news is that many countries have made huge progress in eliminating corporal punishment in schools in recent decades. And now we need urgent action to ensure that all children can benefit from non-violent education. And we are in it together to ensure that. To explore these issues, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of international leaders and experts that include ministers, economic, legal, educational, and policy specialists, people who have been working to end violence in schools for many years, and most importantly, by children themselves, the most important voices that we have today, and I'm delighted for that. Without any further delay, as Bess has already been started to introduce, I'm pleased to introduce 3 members of the End Violent Child and Youth Advisory Forum. We must have that in Pakistan and many other countries. And this is such a role model. We have Lucia, Christina, and Abdul. I'm so delighted to have you on this panel. Lucia is 18 years old and from Ecuador. She's a part of the Global Network of Religions for Children, and as part of this has done advocacy work with the campaign Se Dialogo No Se Maltrata, which means we engage in dialogue instead of bruising, and supports the Learning to Live Together trainings. Christina is 17 years old and from Nepal. Christina is actively involved in her municipal level child club network, advocating for child rights protection from harm and safe schools. Abdul is 16 years old and a child rights advocate from Philippines. Within his organization, Boze Kabatan, or Voices of the Youth, and as a youth leader of his school student council, he is actively involved in the promotion of children's rights through the advocacy on anti-physical and humiliating punishment in schools campaigns. We are grateful for the opportunity to hear your perspective and on school corporal punishment, and then we will hand over to you to interview the next 2 speakers. So we start with Lucia. You have 6 minutes on the impact of school corporal punishment on children. And I so look forward to listening to you. Lucia.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event. Okay. It is proven that physical punishment in childhood has serious consequences on the emotional and physical development of boys and girls. Furthermore, it can perpetuate a cycle of violence that affects future generations. Boys and girls who experience physical punishment can develop mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and conduct disorders. They may also experience physical problems such as chronic pain, heart disease, and others. Personally, I have been able to experience an education free of violence in the country where I currently reside, and I can attest to the advantage of studying with respect from teachers and other staff. Thanks to this, I have been able to attain, like my classmates, a comprehensive development both to focus on my studies and hobbies, and on being a better person and human. However, it is very notorious how parents physically punish their children even in front of everyone. But this situation is so normalized that even the children themselves consider it okay to be punished. And this situation can easily be transferred to a classroom, and probably no child will complain about it, since it seems normal to them. That is why I think that spaces like this are important, since they are daily situation for some, which must be eradicated. But for this, we must share the consequence of physical punishment with the people who are going to be in constant interaction with the children, in this case, teacher and school staff. This is why we must work together to eradicate physical punishment in school and educational system and promote healthy and loving practices that foster the development of safe and happy children. This event is a sample of our commitment as a society to protect the rights of children and build a more loving and respectful future for everyone. It is an opportunity to learn from experts of the subject, share experience, and reflect together on how we can work as a society to protect children's rights and prevent physical punishment in education. We will listen to experts in the field who will provide us with valuable information about the consequence of physical punishment in children and effective strategies to prevent it. I want to thank everyone present for their commitment to the protection of children's rights and for their interest in learning more about this crucial issue for the well-being of our society. And I hope that this event is fruitful and enriching for everyone.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Christina from Nepal. So Abdul will speak next, and we look forward to listening to you, Abdul.
Good day, everyone. Am I audible? Okay. My name is Abdul, 16 years old, a child leader and advocate of Boses ng Kabataan, or Voice of the Youth, in Zamboanga City, Philippines. So, corporal punishment in schools is a rampant issue in the Philippines and even all over the world. Children are considered the most vulnerable of all sectors, and yet, sadly, we still experience abuse and maltreatment in school, where we spend most of our time. I have observed that students who are labeled as non-performing, those who are considered different and always late in class, are those who are specially punished in school. Because of this, students who are punished chose not to go to school because of the pain and humiliation that they feel. It is not right that we experience harsh discipline in school where we supposedly learn and develop into our fullest potentials. Our learning is affected, our self-esteem and confidence are damaged, and most of all, we are hurt physically and emotionally. I hope that one day children and youth all over the world do not experience any form of violence and abuse. As a child advocate, I understand that speaking about my truth and sharing my experiences would go help and catalyze change. School and communities should work with us, conduct different programs that would end violence and push campaigns promoting positive discipline for betterment of every children and youth. In addition, as a youth leader, it is important for me to hear the voices of my fellow children and youth. I use my platform to represent their ideas and opinions about things that matters to them. With my organization, the Voices of the Youth, and a youth leader of the school's student council, I am also actively involved in promotion of children's rights through our advocacy on anti-physical and humiliating punishment in schools campaign. To address the issue of corporal punishment in schools, I call all the leaders of my country and all over the world to do the following. First, strengthen the implementation of existing laws and policies that protect children from physical and humiliating punishment in schools. The child protection policy of our Department of Education in the Philippines, but it would be better if children are protected from physical and humiliating punishment, not just in their schools, but also in their homes. So I hope that all countries, including Philippines, can pass a law that would prohibit physical and humiliating punishment in the homes, schools, and other places where children are. Second is to implement awareness raising programs for children and youth on the issue of corporal punishment in schools and how to respond or report when they encountered it in school. And finally, to provide essential child representative protective services in communities that are disregarded by the government due to accessibility. If corporal punishment in schools no longer exists, children will have a safer and healthier space to learn.
to learn in, and we will be able to connect with our peers better and have better relationships with our teachers and school staff. As a children and youth, we must speak up and speak out, take a stand and fight against violence that we children experience. Together, we are the hope for a better future.
Thank you so much, Abdul. You both, Lucia and Abdul, you are such inspirations. And I must share before we go on to the other agenda that in Pakistan, a couple of months ago, we were celebrating the Diamond Jubilee of our parliament. And we held within the parliament a children's session. And children from schools came, all sorts of schools, and they're the ones who requested and asked for a child rights caucus in the parliament, which we were able to make. So I go on to request the Lucia and Abdul to interview our next two speakers, who are Lion Bago Rasmussen, Education Specialist and Safe to Learn Global Coordinator, UNICEF, and Sonia Wohuito, and Corporal Punishment Legal Policy Specialist, Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. So go ahead.
Christina and Lucia next.
Christina?
Ryan, can you tell us about corporal punishment? How common is it? What effect does it have on children? And what can be done about it?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for this excellent question, Lucia. So unfortunately, corporal punishment is very common. Violence, whether it's physical, psychological, online, or sexual violence, is one of the biggest challenges and biggest rights violations that children and young people are facing today. Every year, 246 million children and young people around the world experience violence in and around schools. And these are only the cases that we know of. Then we haven't even counted the ones that are not reported. I know that we'll hear more from Sonia later about the data specifically on corporal punishment, but we also know that 793 million children and young people live in countries around the world where corporal punishment is still not fully prohibited. And I really want to stress it's a direct violation of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and it's linked also to intersectionality such as gender, race, disability in respect to prevalence. So we need to be mindful of that as well. In terms of your question around the effect of violence on children, and you spoke to it and Abdul spoke to it as well, I want to speak about it on two different levels. So one level is at the level of the child and young person's development, so the brain, the well-being, the physical and psychological development. A child who's just been hit will have a brain that's in shock mode and will not learn. Corporal punishment basically triggers harmful psychological and physiological responses. So children don't only experience pain, sadness, fear, anger, shame, and guilt, but feeling threatened can also lead to physiological types of stress and the activation of neural pathways that support dealing with danger. You can't learn when you're scared. It's really important to recognize that violence has a big impact on children's ability to learn and their learning outcomes. It's also a major obstacle for children to stay in school. You've already, as young people, raised this today. Sometimes it leads to dropout, and that can increase other harmful practices such as child marriage and protection concerns, for example, which leads me to the other level that I want to speak to, which is the consequences for the wider societal development. For example, the World Bank estimates that the economic cost of violence in and around schools is $11 trillion. I think it was even you, Lucia, who spoke also to the cyclical nature of violence. We have evidence that when boys experience violence, they're more likely to perpetrate violence later in life, and girls are more likely to be a victim of further violence later in life. So it's really important to stress that there's also gender dynamics and gender equality and inclusion at stake. Violence is a result of the abuse of power over others. So I also really want to stress that all efforts to prevent violence need to be gender transformative and inclusive to be sustainable. Safe to Learn is, for example, a signatory to the Freetown Manifesto, where there are 4 key action areas on gender transformative leadership in education. And this is really essential for us to move forward in addressing violence. Lastly, I'll say a few things about what can be done about it, but I know we'll also talk a lot more about that in the subsequent discussions we're having today. Violence is not inevitable. We have the tools, we can prevent and respond to violence to help keep children safe, but not enough is being done to deliver the solutions. Safe to Learn, as an example, is a global initiative that's dedicated to end violence in and around schools, and we work with partners all over the world. There are 5 key areas that we are trying to create progress on to end violence in and around schools. They're highly relevant when we're talking about corporal punishment. Overall, we're really looking at the role of the education sector in addressing violence in and around schools. We combine child protection, social and behavior change efforts to provide, for example, alternative forms of discipline and challenge some of the really deeply rooted social and gender norms that support the acceptance of violence. So I'm really happy to be part of this discussion today. I'll stop here because I know that we'll be talking more about what can be done. And thank you, and over to you, Lucia.
Thanks. Tina, hi, can you tell us about the report? What are 3 of the most important things it focuses on, and what does it hope to achieve?
Thank you, Lucia, and hello, everyone. The report is a very comprehensive report, very rich, and it's quite difficult for me to just summarize it in 3 points, but I will try my best. What I took out of the report is that first, it highlights the high prevalence of school corporal punishment worldwide. It talks about corporal punishment in schools and how it deepens inequality, and also it highlights, it recommends some actions to be taken to address the issue of school corporal punishment. In terms of high prevalence, it is clear that a large number of children are subjected to school corporal punishment. The report actually refers to a recent research which was carried out in Africa and Central America. And the research established that 70% of students reported that they were subjected to corporal punishment in schools. There's another research also carried out in Africa and South Asia, which showed that 40% of students were victims of corporal punishment in schools during the previous week of their interview. And we know that these figures are likely to be higher because students usually are very reluctant to report cases of corporal punishment or any form of violence because they're scared of repercussion and as well as retaliation. So it's a high number, huge prevalence of corporal punishment in schools. In terms of inequality, Lina talked about the gender dimension to corporal punishment, so I'm not going to dwell on it. I can just highlight that sometimes you have laws and policies which make specific provision for the use of corporal punishment, whether on boy or girls. So it's very important to note that there's a gender dimension to it, to the experience, to students' experience of corporal punishment based on their gender. And there are also factors such as disability, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and even immigration status, which will have a big role in the infliction of corporal punishment on students. For instance, in US school, it was found that Black students, Black boys, were 3 times more likely to be subjected to corporal punishment than their white peers. Same thing in South Africa. Students were 3 times more likely to be, Black students were 3 times more likely to be subjected to corporal punishment than their white peers. So this is important as well to take into account the race. And even in terms of immigration status, you will find that, for example, a Syrian refugee in Lebanon will be, refugees obviously, will be subjected to corporal punishment in schools at a higher level. So this is important to take into account, and disabled children as well. And in terms of action that are needed, the report showed that 63% 3 states currently have not enacted laws to prohibit corporal punishment in schools. We have 33 states that have policies and directives, but this is not enough. We need to have laws in place. And then we heard recently that Sierra Leone in Africa, for example, in Africa had just enacted a law to prohibit corporal punishment in schools. So this is a good news, it's a promising news. But once we have the laws, we need to also have to take practical measures. So the key message here is that laws are good, but they're not enough. We need practical measures. And these practical measures have to be based on comprehensive strategies. For example, the report sees that makes the link between corporal punishment and other forms of violence in schools, like bullying, gender-based violence. And we need to take all these forms of violence into account to address corporal punishment in schools. We cannot address corporal punishment in schools only. It has to be, all other forms of violence have to be taken into account. The wider school culture has to be considered, as well as the social norms that lead to the infliction of corporal punishment. So it's a whole comprehensive package that has to be taken into account: laws, practical measures, and comprehensive strategies. So this is what one of the key aspects of the report on corporal punishment in schools. Thank you.
It is important that stakeholders secure a safe environment for children at school to ensure their overall development in education. Sonia, how can educators, health professionals, and other members of the community help prevent corporal punishment on children?
Thank you, Lucia, again. I was talking about the practical measures that needed to be taken into account and to be developed with comprehensive strategies. But also there are some key aspects and proposed solutions, and these are part of the report as well. You will find all these solutions in the report. Obviously, we have to talk about the law itself, the law prohibiting corporal punishment. The schools and the community have to be aware of it, so we have to raise awareness. But we have an aspect that is important, is to engage the whole school community so that they can challenge the harmful norms. So we need to have an open dialogue, that the educators and the professionals have to have an open dialogue with families as well and the communities, and then to have also community-led initiatives. And then I think during this webinar, we'll have examples as well, practical examples. And then children should be involved in the process. We need child participation. And this can happen through children's clubs, for example. And then we need to provide training to teachers and support staff. Obviously, we say that the lack of training should not be a reason for inflicting corporal punishment, but training is important as well. And then I think my colleagues will talk about positive discipline later on. And then we need to put in place a reporting procedure. So it has to be confidential, child-friendly. Children have to be confident to go as well to report cases of corporal punishment. And then we need to have support mechanism in place to support children for their physical and mental health as well. And monitoring. Monitoring is important. We need to know if the measures that have been taken, have been put in place, are efficient, and if not, then what kind of mitigating measures and can be put in place to make sure that corporal punishment is eliminated in schools. So in a nutshell, this is the kind of prevention measures that can be put in place in schools. Over.
Mike, I would like to ask you a similar question. Are there effective alternatives to avoid corporal punishment as a form of disciplining children? What specific action can be taken to encourage healthy and not violent practices in schools and the wider community?
Thanks, Lucia. So first and foremost, a very clear and loud, yes, there are alternatives. There are good ones also to avoid the disruption we've been talking about so much this morning already for children's health and also for societal development. In terms of specific actions, before I go into some concrete examples, I really want to stress and agree with Sonia before in recognizing the combined role of legislative and institutional measures, and then also addressing social and gender norms and behaviors that may prevent the use of positive discipline, even if legislation and policy is in place, because it's a tricky balance and we need to be very mindful of it. In Safe to Learn, we have a programmatic framework and a benchmarking tool where we're basically trying to set measures very concretely for what needs to be in place in a country in order to protect children from corporal punishment in the schools. I want to highlight two different examples, one at the student level and one at the teacher level, because I feel sometimes we actually forget teachers are very important in this, but we also need to make sure that we're working with a whole school approach, which I think Sonia also just spoke to. So there's one example from Indonesia, which focuses on the role of students themselves and bringing students in to create a positive environment and an environment that embraces positive discipline. For example, it works with the students to develop in a participatory manner an anti-bullying policy so that children are not bullying each other. Secondly, it tries to change social norms regarding bullying and sort of calling out on what's unacceptable behavior. Thirdly, it tries to increase awareness and understanding of the teachers on how bullying affects the students and deal with the incidents through positive discipline. So Roots basically trains 30 or 40 students in each school that become change agents. And then these change agents are able to identify problems, initiate anti-bullying initiatives, and combine activities that involve the entire school, the student community, based on something that we call social network theory, where we basically, by identifying the actors of change, we can sort of make sure that it cascades through to the whole school. And I think it's a really excellent example because it means that there's a more kind of comprehensive approach to create an enabling environment for also having positive discipline measures. The other example I want to stress is from Uganda, and I won't say much about it because I know Philbert is on the call as well today, and I'm looking forward to hear from him on his thoughts and the vital role that teachers can play. He's from the Uganda National Teachers Union, which undertakes teaching programs to support teachers on positive discipline, basically giving them skills to use other measures than corporal punishment and disciplining in the classroom. I'll stop there for now, and thanks for the question, Lucia.
Mine and Sonia. Over to you now, Christina.
Thank you, Lucia. My question is for Line. What actions and behaviors will help make sure children are respected, treated with dignity, not humiliated, and all children are able to stand up for their right and be protected from violent behaviors in schools?
Thank you, Christina. So first and foremost, we need to work with social challenges and behaviors at all levels of what we can call the socio-ecological framework. In a school setting, I'm going to try and talk us through what that might look like. So we've spoken a lot to it already today, but at the legislative overall policy level, we need to make sure that corporal punishment is banned first and foremost. And then secondly, and importantly, we need to make sure that the legislation has an effect. So basically, we also need to work with the institutional capacity of schools to prevent and respond to violence, going back to the whole of school approach that I mentioned shortly before. So to answer specifically on how we make sure that children are treated by others with respect and dignity, this could, for example, mean ensuring that teachers have the knowledge and skills to apply positive forms of disciplines, and I mentioned before. But to do this, we also need to recognize the perspective of teachers. When they're trying to manage a classroom with a lot of children, they might be under social pressure to use corporal punishment because there's expectations from the community or from parents that this is a part of raising their children. So it's not to excuse them as such, but we need to understand also why they're using the measures they're using and work with that to basically suggest other and more positive ways of doing it. Enabling children to stand up for their rights, which you also mentioned, which I think is a very important part. We need again also to consider the school environment and the relations both between the students, which I spoke to before in the Indonesia example, and then also between teachers and students, making sure that it's an environment where everybody respects each other. We have so little time today, so it's hard to go into the detail, but just to flag, for example, it would be using other behaviors such as talking, drawing, other types of expression than violence and bullying, for example, to make sure that there's a safe space. And then importantly, as a very concrete measure, we need to make sure that children have reporting mechanisms that are safe, that they can report through when violence happens, and that teachers, for example, also know what to do when violence happens, because these are complex issues, it's very difficult. And the reporting mechanisms link to the kind of level of the children, where they basically need to be able to call out when there is things happening to them that is not okay. We're responsible also as adults. We need to recognize that for the behaviors we pass on through to generations, and we need to make sure that we are providing safe spaces and giving children the knowledge and the tools, both to defend their own rights and to treat others with dignity and respect. And the school is such an important platform to enable these aspects. Again, I'll stop there so I don't go too much over time. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Line. Next question for Sonia. This corporal punishment creates lots of bad impact in the society. So I'm particularly concerned about the post impact of corporal punishment. For example, by this, I mean the psychological and physical scars children bear. What are the long-term consequences of corporal punishment on children? How does it affect children's mental and emotional health? I would also request Sonia and Lucia to respond within a minute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Yeah, research, we have a lot of a plethora of research studies that establish the harmful effect of corporal punishment on children even as they grow into adulthood. So I will list them very quickly so that just for the sake of time. So we have direct physical harm, as you may imagine. So we have children who have injuries and even death. There are many cases of children who go to school and die in school because they've been hit by their teacher. And we have other negative effects on the children's cognitive development. So we have slow cognitive development, poor school marks, it affects school performance. And corporal punishment in school is often the reason why children say they're not attending school. Some of them even drop out of school just because of corporal punishment. And then in some studies that we can see that adults who have experienced corporal punishment as children are less likely to graduate into college, to go to college, and they have less paid, highly paid jobs. So it's important to note that it can affect adults in their life and their social life as well. And then we can also note increased aggression in children, increased violent and criminal behavior as they become adults, and then an increased acceptance, and this is very important, increased acceptance of other forms of violence. So it's not only corporal punishment, it has an impact on other forms of violence, and it can also damage our family relationship. So this is just a brief summary of the many harmful effects of corporal punishment on children. And I think did you want to go ahead?
Oh, sure, you can carry on.
Something, okay, so I'll stop here then.
Thank you, Sonia. Childhood is a key growth age for children, so it must be filled with positive experience. So now I would like to ask Line, what can organizations like UNICEF, NGOs, INGOs, government bodies do to protect and support children from the harm caused by corporal punishment?
Thanks, Christina. Very important question. And I'll start by zooming in on the government bodies, because I think those are the key ones, and we need to all sort of work with those and support them. First of all, we need to ensure that violence against children is prohibited in all settings. I think Sonia also just spoke to it. For example, if violence is accepted in a society and we only ban it in schools, but we don't ban it in the home, it'll be at least like as a minimum, it'll be partially effective, but it won't be very effective. So we need to be mindful of that. And where violence is not prohibited in all sections, we have failed to uphold the rights and promote the norms that make violence unacceptable. Secondly, and in particular, since we're focusing on corporal punishment in schools today, we need to ensure that education sector plans and institutional policies incorporate violence and response. That's a really important role that governments and ministries of education, for example, can play here, with the support, of course, of other actors. And then thirdly, and importantly, and I think I've said it maybe several times today, but really recognize that the implementation of the plans and policies and legislation is key for actual change. And it requires that we also address social and gender norms, behaviors that may condone violence. So we can't only work at one level, we need to work at all the different levels to end violence in and around schools. And as I started out saying, the role of UNICEF, NGOs and INGOs we should continue to support governments in achieving all this. We are all part of the solutions. We all have a role to play in them. So the actions I just outlined, we need to support them as UNICEF, we need to support them as Safe to Learn and as NGOs and INGOs. And just to flag maybe a little bit about the roles that can be played, NGOs and INGOs are playing a key role as implementers often and as first-hand responders sometimes. They can work in collaboration between the UN and government. So they have, and then they also have an important role in pushing the bar for our efforts to address these root causes that we've talked so much about today, which are often linked to deeply rooted gender and social norms. So we really need to, and then there's the intersectionality perspective that we also heard, disability, race, gender, social status, all these complex issues that we really need to support on. And here UNICEF, for example, can leverage expertise across education, child protection, social and behavior change, and other things to work more ambitiously. I'm focusing today a lot on the role of the education sector because we're really trying to see how we can leverage the collaboration across all these different aspects and really work constructively with education. And then just to flag a positive thing in terms of like what governments can do. I think, I forget, sorry which speaker mentioned it, but Sierra Leone, yes, last week passed legislation to ban corporal punishment in schools, which is excellent. And Minister Senge is a Safe to Learn political champion. So there's been a lot of work done there. And then, for example, our role now is to support that this policy is being implemented effectively in the schools in Sierra Leone as a very concrete example of how we all have a role to play as different actors in these aspects. Thanks, and over.
Thank you, Line. Yes, it's true. Unity makes everything easy. If you all unite together, it's definitely possible to end corporal punishment. Line and Sonia, in one sentence, what is your key message today?
Thank you, Christina. Just quickly, I just wanted to say that ending corporal punishment in school is possible. We have very successful experience across the world, and then we hope to all work together as a community to achieve this goal. And then a big shout out to my colleague, Bess Herbert, who coordinated the publication of this wonderful, fantastic report. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Beth. I thought so much. Yeah, that's a very key question. It's hard to answer in one sentence, but I think I'll build on what Sonia is saying and basically say, we know we can prevent violence and keep children safe. So let's do it and focus on delivering the solutions rather than only describing the problems. Over.
Thank you, Sonia and Line, for sharing your beautiful thoughts, and hand back to Menaj.
Thank you very much, Lucia, Christina, and Abdul, and Line and Sonia, for a very thought-provoking, explanation, discussion. And it's really important that we have corporal punishment aspect in all the settings. And here I would like to mention that the bill that I passed in the parliament in Pakistan for Islamabad Capital Territory is not only for schools. It is both public and private schools, informal and formal settings of learning. It is madaris, which is religious seminaries. It is orphanages, any form of caretaking arrangement, and also workplaces and juvenile justice situations. So it's all encompassing, making it all the more complicated for implementing. But the key takeaway for me from this segment is that, you know, children should be leaders in this, and we all have to be supportive, and we have to empower children, because they are the ones who go through so much, and violence can really just devastate their lives. And there are children like the three we had here today, the young people who can really make a difference and be role models. In order to end violent punishments in schools, commitment and leadership at a government level is absolutely vital. And this is so true. This is what I've seen in the parliament. I've used the parliament very effectively to pass laws. And now that I am the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Law and Justice, to write rules for these laws and to make sure that these are implemented. So it starts with the government, and it starts with political will. Governments have the power to pass laws, allocate budgets, very important, and implement national plans at scale that can make a really significant impact on children's experiences of school. Line made a very important comment on having violence, prohibition of corporal punishment embedded in school plans is extremely important. And it's a key takeaway for us for the Pakistani situation as well. We are honored now to hear from two governments who have undertaken pioneering work to eliminate violent punishments in their education systems. First of all, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Jose Antonio Flores, Director General of the Directorate for Quality in School Management for the government of Peru. Mr. Flores, we are grateful for your presence, and we look forward to hearing about the work undertaken in Peru to eliminate corporal punishment in schools. The floor is yours. So we have 7 minutes each for the speakers.
Sí, muy buenos días. Saludos desde Perú. Acá son 5 para las 8 de la mañana. Un grato saludo a todos, a todas. Sí, en Perú hemos desarrollado, bueno, ante todo, estoy en representación de la ministra de Educación, la señora Magné Márquez, ¿no? Ella tenía por un tema de agenda ministerial, no ha podido estar presente. Soy el director general de calidad de la gestión escolar en el Ministerio de Educación de Perú.
For the Ministry of Education in Peru. 30 years ago in Peru, we noticed one of our realities, and that is violence in the context of where our children are, which made us realize that this is a priority. And to start with a specific framework, just as Sonia and others have mentioned, such as LINE, this gave us a strength to adopt this framework to prevent violence against children. The political constitution in '93 has already showed us or gave us a basis for this protection. Now, we began these efforts in 2015. In 2015, we adopted the lay of 304003 against violence in an educational setting. So we already had this policy to eradicate violence in school. At the same time, we began to develop certain tools. We've heard here that we've had those reporting systems that others have spoken about. We began this platform online to record school violence. Through this, we've been able to create these records to identify three sorts of violence that we've seen. Personal violence against students in school, violence between the children and other students, so among students, and then between the teachers and the students. And so we've really been able to identify these different sort of reports. We've been able to monitor it, and this is extremely important. It's extremely important to show what's happening, to break that culture of silence. And why? Well, because in Peru, we have private schools and public schools, and in many cases, the idea is not to show that violence is going on, because the school has prestige, and so they don't want to share that this is happening. So this leads to a culture of silence. 30 years ago, we started to work on this framework. In 2015, we adopted laws against violence in school. But not only stopping violence, but also preventing it. This was key. In 2011, we started speaking about another topic, which is educational coexistence. So school coexistence, meaning to have healthy schools and to in a space that where violence doesn't exist. In 2011 is when we started this sort of effort. We also established protocols so that when violence occurs in school, we can address those issues. We have 6 protocols. One protocol between students when violence occurs without any injuries between students, and then another one which is sexual violence, other violence with arms, other violence which has to do with employees of the school against students, or psychological violence. The fourth has to do with the violence between employees, physical violence between employees and students. And then there's another one that has to do with sexual violence, and the sixth has to do with physical, psychological, and sexual violence, which comes from someone in a family context. So we've been developing these protocols on basis of our experiences, as well as our social context in Peru. Peru is a country that is very diverse culturally. We have a lot of languages that are spoken, many dialects. We also have different cultures within our country, and so we're trying to have a protocol that can be homogeneous, as if we're coming from the same sort of culture. So trying to look for something that adapts to every culture. We have to recognize or acknowledge that in some regions, violence is accepted because it's part of that culture. And so, while considering that cultural problematic, we must make sure that we don't only have the strategy that includes people from Lima, from the capital, but other areas as well. So what has this led us to? This has led us to a progress in all the efforts we're making. We have the digital aspect, for example. CCB, this is the program that we use, which means we can see, meaning we can see what's happening. This is a digital platform which we've been using for more than 10 years, but we're also using other sorts of tools, a psychological assistance, a chat, a phone line that will help us with psychological assistance. We've worked with the Ministry of Health with this. And so it's not only this focus of the Ministry of Education, but this multi-sectorial focus, including the Ministry of Health as well. And what is the goal here? To have schools that are healthy and free of violence, so that students truly have an appropriate context in which they can learn, so that when they go to school, they feel that it is a safe place where they're not going to be abused, where they have rights, so that if something happens against them, they have the opportunity to report it, and to make sure that all public organizations prohibit this sort of violence and prohibit impunity, because many times these cases are reported, and in many countries this happens. Things take a long time, the systems aren't strong enough, and all these situations repeat themselves. A school worker who may have practiced violence against a child may be impune, and so this child sees their integrity and their safety continue in the school context. And that's not all. We've continued to progress. We've been working with the academy, with many other organizations of the public sector as well as private sectors. We've also developed other activities. 30 years later, after understanding that this is a reality, we've been working on this actively during 10 years, but now we have to raise to another level, which is school coexistence, to be able to prevent violence. Several of us have spoken about the importance of prevention, and so we've developed a prevention program, which is called PREVI, meaning prevention. So we're not only going to visualize violence, we are also going to improve the quality of the employees in schools, and also raise awareness between the students to create peace. We're going to have a digital platform which will help us report cases, but also will help us see all the actions that we're taking for school coexistence. It has to be sustainable and continuous. It has to be a really good training system that we use for the employees, for parents, to develop this understanding between them that violence cannot be allowed, to empower people to be able to report violence and have the necessary and appropriate tools, so if something happens, that they can report it. For school directors to understand that they are the leaders of that educational community, so that they can be alert constantly to avoid violence between students, as well as school employees practicing violence against the students. First, violence simply to not be happening. Now, children truly create our new generations in the future, and so these school employees cannot be impacting negatively our entire new generations. We have also developed audiovisual material with the Ministry of Education for the entire educational community. It's been lovely to see the participants here as well, because we are really seeing that others that have presented here are learning about violence, and they're becoming part of the active solution. Not only are they those that are impacted, but they're also part of that active solution, so that we can break the cycle. And I'd like to finish with the following. So we've been making an effort for about 30 years now against violence. And a last survey that we've carried out has shown us that about 21% of people in Peru still believe that for children to learn, they need this corporal punishment. And so this is a red flag because we see that often culturally, some people believe that corporal punishment is still the solution, while it really is not. We can find another way to solve discipline or discipline measures. In Peru, education at all levels should be respectful. This is a continuous effort. It's not something we can achieve today or tomorrow. It's something we've been doing for 30 years, and we're going to take another 30 years on this. But truly, what's important is for children to believe in this. Not only do they know it's happening, but they believe in this. And so this is a wonderful space to have with you. This is a great experience, but we know that we have a long way to go.
Thank
We all
you.
have children, of course.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you so
Flores.
much.
Very inspiring. 30 years and 30 more to go. We've just started in Pakistan. I'm now delighted to introduce Mr. Bassem Al-Habibi, Head of Counseling Unit at the Jordanian Ministry of Education. I so look forward to hearing your experience. Mr. Bassem, are you there?
مرحبا.
Marhaba.
Hello. Marhaba. I'm very happy to participate in this very great lecture that talks about a very important subject. Thanks for the initiative under the Ministry of the Jordanian Ministry of Education to talk about this. Thank you all for being here. Of course, our experience at the Ministry of Education is an old one. We have been in the Ministry of Education working on many different sectors. We all agree on that any abuse against children is a red line. The child is not prepared or not built using abuse. The child in his first stages of life needs awareness and guidance. And then after, if things happen, we are here to help. The students also focused that, yes, we do need to educate children, but also should care about their mental health. The Ministry of Higher Education in Jordan works on a lot of sectors in Jordan. Children's inside the schools, we have policies that talk about how to deal with abuse between a child and another child. We have 6 types of harassment and abuse. We have verbal, corporal, we have abuse and humiliation. We also have people who destroy objects. Also, on the other side, we have when teachers do abuse and harass children, they will start with talking to them, and it might escalate to them losing their job. So this is something that is a red line that we do not talk about. Our Ministry of Education talks with a lot of groups, and our main sponsor is the UNICEF. Through you, I want to thank the UNICEF for all their programs that help in stopping all the harassment and abuse in the Ministry of Education. نعم نحو مدرسية آمنة, which is our program to a healthier school, which talks about how we respond in the Ministry of Education and how we can change the norms in the community. And we know that we just talked about that in some areas it is accepted, corporal damage or corporal abuse is accepted on children. And this is not accepted. We try to change this look that people have, that for children to be learning through corporal damages is not accepted. There are a lot of alternatives that we can use to build the teachers, and we have the guidance, the skills to deal with the children, and to use the alternative educational methods instead of violence. We have alternatives to violence, so we don't have to reach corporal damage with the children. مدرسية آمنة to a safe school. We have a lot of programs that other programs that is for our teachers to be enrolled in. They must go through these programs that are about how to deal with children and to help them and not use violence against them. We have a lot of programs that we work on. A program that is for the parents, and an electronical one that is online. We have a program that started 2009 by Her Highness Queen Rania, based on a report that UNICEF made in 2007. They wanted to know what are the levels of abuse and violence that is going against children, and it was somewhat high. This program aims to lower the violence against children with all types of violence. If the child is in the school or outside the school, in their home, in the society, or online. We talked about electronic abuse. Ministry of Education, the country of Jordan, has been working with UNICEF.
Mr.
To help
Bassem,
stop-
you have
Yeah, say.
1 minute to conclude. It's so impressive. We all need to come to Jordan to have a workshop on your work. So you have 1 minute to conclude all your good work that you're explaining to us.
والتزمت مواصلة العملية معهم. احنا عندنا تعزيز الإطار التنظيمي من خلال إيجاد تعليمات انضباط طلابي من خلال
We have policies for the children and for the teachers, and the reporting, how we do reporting. And violence should be an indicator that should be also watched. We have programs that if any child has any harm caused to them, we have programs that we enroll them in, and there will be a complete investigation. Any kind of abuse that happens in school, the school guidance or the school council can electronically diverge and deal with it accordingly. We have television series and entertainment ones that all want to stop violence and minimize it in schools. And we have a scan that is done monthly to see what is the level of violence in our schools. They have a form to fill up. I'm sorry for taking a lot of time. Thank you, everything. And I'm very happy to be here.
Very, very impressive. I'm a big fan of Queen Rania's, and we all must visit Jordan and Peru to see your great work and to learn from your great work. Now that we're running out of time, it's very, very interesting. I'm delighted to introduce the next speaker, Quentin Wardon, former lead economist at the World Bank and now director of the UNESCO International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa. Based in Addis Ababa, the Institute aims to inform education policies, strengthen teacher professional development, and build capacity in education institutions, including ministries of education. Indeed, very important. During his time at the World Bank, Quentin co-authored the investment case for ending violence in schools. He will now tell us about why preventing school corporal punishment is both critical for children's development and academic achievement, as well as a smart economic investment. And we have 7 minutes for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benas. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Everything good? All right. And can you see the PowerPoint presentation as well? I think so, right? Wonderful. Thank you. All right, I won't take more than the 7 minutes. I might try to take less because I do realize we are behind. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And as you mentioned, when I was at the World Bank, which was just a few months ago, I did this study on ending violence in school, an investment case that was funded by the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. We are now doing a bit of additional work at UNESCO ICBA. ICBA is the International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa. So what I'm going to do is briefly remind participants at the webinar of some of the main findings from the study done at the World Bank, and then I'll zoom in on corporal punishment in school. So when we did the study, we looked at the prevalence, and we all know that violence in schools is extremely widespread, virtually in all the countries. And when you look at different types of violence, typically a third of the children are affected by physical violence, by emotional violence. Sexual violence is lower, but nevertheless very serious as well. So what we try to do is to look at the impact of violence on schooling and learning. This is a schematic representation. We found, not surprisingly, that violence reduces attendance, increases dropouts, reduces learning, reduces trust in the schools, in the teachers, and the experience of the children. And we put some very tentative measures of the losses in learning and the losses in educational attainment that came from this. And I'll talk about the corporal punishment specifically in just a minute. What was also important is that we looked also at impacts on health indicators. And to me, what was really an important finding is that the impacts on health indicators, risky behaviors, health problems, all kind of that problems, I mean, even suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide, on all of those health indicators, violence in schools had even larger effects than on schooling and learning. And we didn't try to put an estimate of the cost of that, but it's important to recall that. Now, somebody before mentioned the estimate that we came at, that the lifetime economic losses from violence in schools are worth $11 trillion. I mean, these are very rough estimates with lots of assumptions. It's not a precise number, but it shows that it's really having a large negative effect. And that specific cost was only for the impact on schooling and learning. It was not for the broader impacts on health. And it comes from the fact that human capital wealth, which is the value today of the future earnings of the population, is 2/3 of the wealth of nations. And that's why those impacts on education, which affect earnings, which affect human capital wealth, are so large. Now, corporal punishment, right? So you know that in quite a few countries, corporal punishments, at least in schools, is prevented, prohibited, but there are still many countries where it's allowed. And you also know that corporal punishment more broadly is not well prevented in the law in terms, for example, of what happens in the home and elsewhere. And this is a map for Africa on the legal prohibition of all types of corporal punishment. Very few countries actually have done that. And one of the things that we are finalizing now for Africa is actually estimating how many children are not protected, including from violence in schools, not protected by the law. And what you can actually argue is that in many cases, the number of children not protected is increasing, even if more countries are adopting those protections, right? Just by sheer population growth.
Quentin,
Now,
could we just ask
yes.
you to move your slides on a bit so we can?
It doesn't
Thank
work.
you.
On my screen it works. Does it work for you?
We can only
No.
see the first slide.
Ah, well, I don't know what happens there. And thank you for telling me. So, well, what we'll do then is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm just going to explain in words so you'll be less distracted because I'm at more than my half of my 7 minutes. So we will send the slides. I've sent them to Bess and Bess can send it to everybody, right? Let me go to the corporal punishment aspect specifically. And I'm sorry that you could not see the slides on my screen, it worked. So, well, one of the key findings we found for Africa, and that was with PATSEC data, which is a student assessment in about 10 countries in Francophone Africa, was that 1/3 of the teachers were using corporal punishment in school, right? And 2/3 of the children were beaten up in schools by the teachers. Why 2/3 versus 1/3? Well, because a teacher teaches some, many children can be taught by different teachers, right? So the proportion of the children beaten up is larger than the proportion of teachers who actually use corporal punishment. So that is also the case actually in the countries that have legally prevented corporal punishment in school. And I think we are all convinced that the legal prevention is not enough. It's the same thing for child marriage, right? About 80% of child marriages in the world occur in countries that have prevented legally child marriage, right? But it still happens. We need to do more. What we also found is that 1/3 of the children were afraid in school. Now, we don't know exactly whether this is for corporal punishment or other aspects, but then the fact of being afraid in school had a very large negative effect on learning as measured through student test scores, right? And that effect from being afraid in school, which is likely to be due in good part to corporal punishment, is as large as the effects of many other variables, like teacher absenteeism, right? Or disability, or the quintile of well-being that you come from, right? The being afraid in school is as negative at the margin as an effect on learning than these other dimensions, right? And this is one of the facts that we used when we computed that $11 trillion measure. Now, there is one last point that I want to make, and I think it's going to be made by others today, is that there is a way to implement programs, right, to go beyond the law, right? And one of the programs that I really like, and I think many of us know it, is the Good School Toolkit, right? Which in Uganda reduced the violence by teachers on students dramatically. I remember, I'm not sure it's correct, but it was about 40% reduction, right? Now, what matters here is that the cost of the program when they piloted it was not negligible. It was $15 per child, right? But there were simulations that were made that show that once you expand a program like that nationally, right, the cost in the first few years is still going to be substantial. I mean, $5, $6 per child. But then once it's mainstream in the curriculum, once you have printed all of the manuals that they use to train the teachers and make the community aware and so on, then the cost drops dramatically. And after a few years, most of the cost of the program, and it drops to a few dollars, is actually the opportunity cost of the teachers in implementing the program. Their opportunity cost because they are paid, right? But that's not a new cost for the government. So it's actually affordable, right? And I think we need to spread that message that those type of interventions, like the Good School Toolkit, when they're scaled up nationally, tend to have a much lower cost and are therefore affordable because most of the cost is time of teachers who are already paid. That's all I wanted to say, Menas. I know that I've gone for my 7 minutes and I hope it was useful to you. And the presentation will be shared by the organizers to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin Wardon, for your energy and for your commitment. And without your passion, where would we be? We started with very few people working in, committed people working in to prohibit corporal punishment. And it seems today that it's becoming quite a movement. Very able youth. That's very, very exciting. I have pushed for laws and I believe in laws, but also in implementation. So it's vital to have laws that make clear that corporal punishment in school is not permitted. Today, we have very experienced experts in the wide range of practical measures needed to eliminate corporal punishment in schools. Professor Shahnaz Matthews, Director of the Children's Institute at University of Cape Town and founding member of the Coalition of Good Schools. Baguma Philbert Bates, General Secretary of the Ugandan Teachers Union, and Prerit Rana, Chief Executive of Agrasar, an Indian organization working to enhance social security and end school corporal punishment within migrant communities. Welcome to all of you. And let's start with some questions. And Professor Matthews, the question to you is, the Coalition for Good Schools has recently undertaken a study examining effective strategies for preventing violence in schools. Can you tell us about some of the key findings and what setting does this study use? And is it applicable to at a global reality or a specific setting? 2 minutes.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. 2 minutes, what do you say? So the Global Coalition for Good Schools, we formed in 2019 as thought leaders in the area of preventing violence in and through schools. And one of the first tasks was really to unpack what are some of the key interventions and strategies that are successful in the Global South to prevent and end violence through schools. I led the evidence review for the Global Coalition, and what we found was that there are 5 main strategies, and many have alluded to this today already. But one of the key findings from this review is really that multi-component interventions are most effective in reducing children's experience of violence. And these interventions engage multiple stakeholders, not just in how it is implemented, but right from the planning stages. And it is about investing in structural changes, as everyone has been speaking about today, around the policies, developing operational guidelines, and all of this increased sustainability of these interventions. What we also found in our review is that targeted intervention, so whole school programming, and I think, you know, the speaker just before me spoke about the Good Schools Toolkit, which is really a whole school based program. And through these programs, what we do see is that creating favorable ecosystems or school climates is really important, because this then allows for policies and programs that not only engage teachers, but also engage young people in programming is really critical to prevent both bullying as well as corporal punishment by teachers. I think, you know, what we also found is that the whole notion of training teachers is really critical, and that there are successful interventions in the Global South that where teachers can be trained and empowered. And I know I'm very short on time, but what I do want to say is the most important thing is that program development isn't just a once-off. It is an iterative process where it has to be programs has to be adapted to context. So what works in one setting doesn't mean it will work in another. So for instance, we talk about the Good Schools Toolkit, a whole school-based program that's incredibly successful, but it doesn't mean it will necessarily work in another context if it's not successfully adapted. And therefore, it's really important to think about programming as programs needing to be adapted to the social cultural context, because that will allow for effective program implementation.
I'll just intervene here. There is another question that I had was that what do we need to understand about addressing violence in and around schools in the global South when you're talking about context in particular? And you can
I think, I'll extend a little bit on that, because I think what's really important for us to understand is that violence is a complex problem. And we know far more now than what we knew, say, 10 years ago about the pattern of violence and how violence differs per country and region is really, really important. And therefore, thinking about how programs are implemented and the design of programs need to take into account the cultural context. What we have found that's really important is that programs, whether it is a Southern-based program, still need to be adapted for wherever it's going to be implemented, even if it's in the same country context. And that pathways to change is never linear. And therefore, you've got to be thinking about learning about around every program. For programs to be sustainable, we've learned that it's important to partner with programmers, that it's not just researchers coming in and testing a program, but that partnership between programmers, education departments are really vital, because that will allow for sustainability of programs. And it's really critical that we document all our lessons learned, because by documenting those lessons, what it will do is it will enable us. So for instance, if I run a program in South Africa and learning from that context, and you pick it up in Pakistan, it means that someone in Pakistan can then see what some of the challenges have been. And there's not enough done about that. So, if we look at what's successful in context now, and we examined 151 papers, of which 93 were distinct programs, but not much is known about those programs and what the magic in certain programs are that makes them so successful. And I would urge programmers as well as researchers to partner to document some of those lessons, because that will move the field forward. It's also critical that there is investment, not just from bilateral donors, but within country also, to invest, to understand what those programs are that are successful. It's only through doing this that we're going to be successful in ending violence against children. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. Baguma Filbert Bates, I have a question for you, and can you speak to what is needed to help teachers move to non-violent methods of classroom discipline? And my other question would be, what else is needed at a wider national, local, or community level to support non-violent teaching? So there are two questions that I have for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me thank those who have made presentations in this webinar for the rich content they have brought. One is to look at the teacher. How do we get the teacher? We need to look at the teacher training institutions and those who train teachers. So before we look at the teacher, we need to look at the teacher trainers and see how well they are trained to model and nurture this teacher into the teacher we would like to see in the classroom setting. We have culture and traditions and practices in every education institution, in every school. And therefore, the teachers from the teacher training colleges need to come when they are well modeled and they are aware of the dangers of corporal punishment, so that they don't be perpetrators of corporal punishments, but they should be peacemakers within the same learning environment. We need a safe learning environment. And therefore, teachers need to integrate peace education and conflict resolution in the teaching learning process. The teachers need to continuously be taken through to know the dangers of corporal punishments. In Uganda here, there was even an attempt of coming up with a book alternative to corporal punishments. But this is coming as a result of teachers coming out of the teacher training colleges with corporal punishment as a way of instilling discipline, not knowing that corporal punishment also breeds violent behavior in individuals and is expressed in the communities and societies where domestic violence, gender violence is the order of the day. And therefore, this alternative to corporal punishment, coupled with a good school kit, helped to reduce. I cannot tell you that in Uganda there is no corporal punishment. It is there because teachers are individuals, and sometimes the environments they work in, these environments do not tune them to the level we need. But we also need to have learners aware of what corporal punishment mean, so that they don't transfer. Whereas we are protecting the learner from corporal punishment, then we don't need to see learners administering corporal punishment to their colleagues as a way of learning from their teachers and extending it to the fellow learners. We need to have talking compounds in the schools, even the classroom environment, that talks about the dangers of corporal punishment, so that every time learners are moving out, every time teachers are moving, they are reminded by these messages to know that there is a danger if you administer corporal punishments. These corporal punishments do not leave the learners the way they are, because they create fear, they create anger, they create humiliation, and therefore they can lead to school dropout. They can breed violent citizens who will just leave school and go to implement what they have been administered to. And therefore, the teachers need to know all this, and we need not to get tired, so that we continue to remind them of their professional ethics, so that they don't go outside the professional ethics and administer corporal punishment. That is a way of showing that you have failed on your professional path if you engage in corporal punishment. But we are also aware that some schools have got a tradition of corporal punishments. Some of them have got a culture of corporal punishments. And therefore, we need to do wider sensitization to make sure that everybody is on board and we are on the same page.
Waguma, if I may ask, can I just intervening for a little bit. Do you have a law against corporal punishment in Uganda?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good to know.
Corporal punishment is condemned in Uganda.
Okay. Continue.
The second question. The second question is, what else is needed at a wider national, local, and community levels? We need to know that fighting corporal punishment is not going to be done by teachers or administrators of the schools. We need every stakeholder to appreciate and know the dangers of corporal punishment. And therefore, the sensitization should be taken beyond the school, because we may restrict teachers and say teachers are not supposed to administer corporal punishments, but when the parents and guardians are doing the same, when the community members are doing the same along the road. And therefore, we need to sensitize. How do we do this? We need to arrange music, dance, and drama themes that talk about the dangers and consequences of corporal punishments. We need to have media, print media and social media about corporal punishments and its dangers. We need to educate the communities to know that the spiral effect of corporal punishment in school is what we see in the communities, where the people are scared of moving, where the people are scared of their lives, because people who have gone through the school system, or people who have been groomed in violent homes, are actually taking bad examples to the communities. And therefore, we need social dialogue, around corporal punishment, so that we can have an environment that is free of violence, that is peaceful, and promotes co-living in the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Baguma. And let me reiterate that, in my opinion, Ugandan National Teachers Union has a great leader, and your understanding of corporal punishment and the work that you have done is indeed remarkable. Question for Prerit Rana. Your organization, Agra Sar, has been working to end school corporal punishment in India for many years. Can you explain what you have learned through your work around what works to prevent the use of corporal punishment? And my second question to you would be, very interesting to hear that you seek to involve and empower children as part of your work to stop violent punishment in schools. How have you done this? And what have you learned about involving children in this way? And today's webinar also is putting a lot of emphasis on putting children in the center. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Aziz. So speaking at the last, overwhelmed with a lot of insights from the speakers, and thank you for that. Let me talk about 3 dilemmas, Ms. Aziz, and the insights which we have been developing and trying to strengthen as we progress. The first is whether we follow an approach of coercion or compassion. So on one side, we have laws, we have rules wherein we can punish the teachers and other people who indulge into corporal punishment. On the other side, we have a situation wherein corporal punishment is not even considered as a problem. So, one thing which I've learned in my life is that you cannot teach someone by giving just giving a lecture. So a person has to reflect. So so we realize that even if teachers are beating children and the parents also indulge into that, instead of preaching that this is wrong, we ask questions. What you have been doing, is that right? Does it improve the learning levels of children, psychosocial minds of children? And what I have learned is that children, it takes time, but the teachers realize and they reflect and they accept that what they have been doing is wrong. And then there comes the time when they start trying for a change. And the second dilemma we have been facing is whether to, how much patience do we keep? So we have a helpline wherein we keep getting cases. Just today itself, we got a case which was very severe. And how much patience do we keep? Do we straight away go and either complain about the teacher, or do we just try and attempt a systemic solution? So, a lot of times it's very easy to say, but a lot of times we also falter and we say, we just go and talk to the teachers right away. And many times we get into a mode wherein we try to just stop it then and there. But what we have learned is that the sustainable change comes when we rely on the infrastructure that is being created. So here in India, we have NCPCR, a National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, which has created this mechanism of CPMCs, Corporal Punishment Monitoring Cells. Exist mostly on papers. A lot of stakeholders are not even aware of such a mechanism. So we try and build those government infrastructure and ensure that whatever work we have been doing is passed on to the monitoring cells and the school management committee, which includes parents and teachers and other stakeholders, and move out of it. But that would require a lot of patience and time to see the change. The third is, which also relates to your second question, whether we consider children as only the victims, or children can also be part of solution. So this is not easy again, because the first thing we want to make sure is that let us not put burden of eliminating corporal punishment to children. They are already going on under so much of stress, and then to say that children are the ones who would lead it is a problem. But then we have learned that children have amazing strength. Children like Abdul and Christina, and we have so many of them here in India and rest of the world. So how to ensure that they come to their full potential and work as a solution. Children have an amazing strength of mobilization. So if you have to spread word in the community, just tell it to children, and the children will spread it much more faster than how adults would do. And other strengths which children have, which we don't have as an adult, is that we keep grudges. So if we don't like someone, we keep harping on it, and but children don't. So even if a teacher would beat a child, and once we have conversation with the child just forgets that the teacher has beaten her or him, and move forward, and that creates magic. So we work a lot on relationship building. So we believe that if teachers and parents and children, they have a strong relationship, then it will really tone down the severity of corporal punishment and the incidents as well. So we work a lot on creating solidarity group of children, wherein they help each other, because we work with migrant communities, interstate migrant workers, and most of them are laborers. So teachers come up with reasons like, the children are not hygienic, they don't do homework, they don't study, etc. But then when we some of these concerns teachers have are also genuine. Not to say that because of these concerns they would beat them, but these concerns. So we make sure that the children in their solidarity groups, they help each other, and ensure that they do well in their studies, be more disciplined, and then pass on the baton to teachers and parents to make steps in that direction.
Preet, that's a big wow. And I'm just so impressed with all the panelists of this segment. And I'm going to quickly come back to all three of you. We're, we have extended our time. And the reason was that I just couldn't stop the youth who were asking questions in the beginning. I just it was just like that movement that they were feeling so empowered, and I just could not. And I really apologize for that. As a chair, I should have been more, but they were brilliant. And all of you are, for all the work that you're doing, that the youth can be the leaders in this. So I'm just going to make a quick round to all three of you, Professor Shanaz Matthews, Baguma, Prerit. For everyone, what is one thing you would like to see today done to accelerate progress towards ending corporal punishment in schools? And starting with Professor Matthews. Very impressive work that you have, Professor Matthews.
Just want to say, so I think it's really critical for young people to be centered in any programming or interventions that we develop. I think they should be active participants, and we should encourage them to be part of the planning and implementation of programming right from the start. It's their lives that matter, and it's their lives we want to change, and therefore it's critical that we bring children into the center, and young people have the capacity to lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baguma. Baguma, are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to see every education stakeholder, including the learners, taking part in the fight against corporal punishment and promote peace education and conflict resolution in schools, thus creating a safe and healthy learning environment.
Thank you, Prerit. And I just read Bess's comment that you do a blog also. I look forward to reading that. So what's your wish list on ending corporal punishment?
So Mrs. For every problem, like be it climate change, be it problem of education, agriculture, economy, there are leaders who have devoted their lives for that cause. Unfortunately, for corporal punishment in India, there is none. At least as per my understanding, there are organizations.
You are one.
So, my whole time go into managing the organization I have been leading, Ms. Aziz. And so the next step I have been attempting is that, I'm trying to find a CEO of an organization, and the potential CEO is actually listening to this conversation, and I'm excited about it. Over next 3 decades of my working life, can I devote my whole life in finding solution to this problem of corporal punishment instead of trying to run an organization is the key. And not just me. I have met across a lot of youngsters and other professionals who really want to attempt that. And how can we ensure that we come together and attempt solutions for meaningful change is what I want to see.
Meaningful change. Thank you so much. As we bring this event to a close, I would like to thank all the panelists. And I would not dare to, try to wrap it up, because the conversation was just so diverse, and so flavorful. And with the thoughts that I have as one of the links in the chain, global chains, as I would like to call myself, that we do need leaders and mentors, and putting children as the center of youth, as the center of this entire campaign. And it's become a global campaign and requires a lot of compassion. And as Prerit said, which I really like, that it is compassion. It's not about institutions only, bureaucracy and all that, but it's about compassion. Entire communities, whether it's school community, it's parents, teachers, governments, legislators, political leaders, they have all to be brought together by the leaders and the mentors and the children. And we all need to work together. We have so much to learn. And my heart is just filled with hope today, that so much work has been done, and we really do need to connect with each other and learn with each other. Thank you so much. And I really want to keep in touch with all of you and learn from your work. Thank you. And thank you to the organizers as well. Thank you and goodbye.
باي للجميع.